All right. Hello, and welcome to Rive Reflections in Veterinary Education. This month's episode, we are welcoming a guest, Dr. Heidi Banse, to the show. And we are all super excited to have you here and to, you know, I love these shows. They're probably my favorite of the episodes we do because I always learn really cool things about our guests, people even that I know somewhat, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So I'm very excited for what we're going to learn from you, Heidi, and to tell us where you've been, what you've been doing, how you got to where you are, and bring us up to what you're doing today. So welcome, Heidi, to the show.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Bobby. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. Very excited for y'all's podcast. So just a little bit about me. I started out my veterinary career at Washington State University and then went on to the University of Georgia as a large animal intern. Then went to Oklahoma State University where I did a combined residency and PhD program, finished there in 2013, and then moved to the University of Calgary for my first faculty position. I was there as an assistant professor of therapeutics for 4.5 years before I moved on to LSU as an assistant professor of equine medicine. And I was there for 7 years, and that was kind of where I started to transition my career journey, I think, from a faculty member towards a really education-oriented faculty member and towards what I would consider to be an educator. And then ended up moving into educational administration because I had such a passion for creating educational experiences that were student-centered. It seemed to work out that way. So transitioned into a role of director of education and then associate dean for educational strategy. Spearheaded the implementation of our new curriculum at LSU in 2023. And then had the amazing fortune to stumble upon this opportunity as dean at Arkansas State University, which I just began my role in July 2024 here at Arkansas State, building a whole new program. So it has been a journey for sure.
Rowan, congratulations on your deanship. Like, that's amazing. Just
what
incredible.
year, Heidi, what year did you graduate from Wazoo?
2007.
And then were you an intern at Georgia when I was there?
I was. Mm-hmm.
I can't believe that. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know if we worked together and all, but I never put that together.
I'm so memorable, clearly. But yes, I was.
Clearly he is too. So there you go.
So Heidi,
well,
do you remember
my wife gives me a pass on this one because she's like, you are huge and like memorable, right? Like most people are like, I don't know, it's the brunette lady, in veterinary medicine.
You're not wrong.
Well, I do have to say, Eric, that I can feel you on that because I actually have people come up to me that knew me from like 4th grade. Seriously. They're like, hey, Catherine, how are you? Well, they call me Kathy. Hey, Kathy, how are you? I'm like, fine. They're like, you don't remember me? I'm like, they're like, I used to sit with you in 4th grade. I'm like, yeah, I was the only Asian girl in the entire school. So I'm sure that's why you remember me. So
Eric, too, though, like when you're the trainer and you have a bunch of trainees that are changing all the time every year, right? Like it's very different than, I think when you're the trainee, because I think about the people I trained under, it's very easy comparatively. So we'll give you a little bit of a pass, but
well, it's a volume thing too, right? Like you have anyway, side.
It's really funny though. So, but that's like a whirlwind through your career, Heidi, and like pretty incredible. And where are you from originally? Like, where did you grow up?
I'm from Montana, so from Western Montana. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And you bounced around quite a bit. Yeah,
indeed.
Fun. That's one of the things I really love about veterinary medicine. Is the opportunities that it can afford to live in different places and different parts of the world, even different countries, different cultures, but even like within the US, there's so much variety when you go to different places. We're going to get to the education stuff because obviously that's the podcast, but I want to know what assistant professor of therapeutics, like, I don't know what that means. I mean, I have some ideas, but
no, it was a unique title for sure. And I think they constructed it because a lot of what they were looking for in that position was applied pharmacology. So that's where the therapeutics came in. So when I was hired on at Calgary, I co-taught the pharmacology course series with the dean at the time, Alistair Cribb, and he was a bona fide pharmacologist. So I felt like that I could kind of finagle my way through the medicine aspect as a trained internist, but he was the hardcore pharmacologist. And so we worked together, and he had created all the content. He was an amazing mentor, an amazing colleague, because he basically just handed off his lectures to me, and then I could kind of gather in some of the small animal stuff that I hadn't thought about in a while, to teach students, and then was able to flesh out some of the large animal portion. And so it was a really amazing position. I will say, as new faculty, sometimes we tend to pigeonhole ourselves into roles that we feel like we trained for. And I certainly, my PhD was in endocrinology, like I was a large animal internist. So this was a big reach for me from a faculty position. And I certainly, kind of got thrown into the deep end and just keep swimming. And just by the pure magnitude of information I needed to relearn. Not to say that, again, I had tremendous mentorship, and I'm so grateful to Alistair for all that he did for me there. But there was a lot to learn and know. But I think one of the things that helped me with was, because I didn't know the information quite as well, maybe, as someone as a trained pharmacologist was, I was able to ratchet back the amount of information and focus on key principles that, number one, I used every day in practice, and also was, able to think about things, more like a novice student. And so I learned that way. And that, I think that was really beneficial for my pathway as an educator, to think more about those principles and how students learn, and rather than focusing on making sure I transmitted all the pieces of knowledge that I knew, because it wasn't very much.
I bet that's not true, but it's fascinating because when you were kind of giving your overview of your career progression, you mentioned that it was at LSU that you really kind of pivoted toward education, but it sounds like actually the seeds were being planted a little earlier than that. So I'm wondering, like, if you reflect back, when you think back, like, what do you think in your background really did? Was it the time, in that first faculty position? Were there things before that looking back, you're like, oh yeah, those seeds were being planted then?
Yeah. And I think, so I will say, I did my internship, frankly, because I was terrified of going to practice and didn't feel prepared, which is a horrible reason to do an internship. I
disagree. I think it's a great reason.
But that was my reason. But in my internship, I will say I developed a passion for clinical teaching. Yeah. And so that kind of led me towards my residency. I also hated suturing, so made me want to be more specialized than having to do any surgery at all, which medicine seemed like a good fit for me. So both those things, but I really loved clinical teaching. And I think, as many of us do when we finish our training, we think being an academic educator is clinical teaching. And so, and then landing at Calgary really taught me about these other elements of being an educator and what that looked like. And I think Calgary did, I would say, kind of planted those, made me consider being more a comprehensive educator than just a clinical educator, which I think so many of us have a passion for early on as specialists, because that's where we sit for a bit. But Calgary did a really good job. It was a small cohort of students. It was a very student-centered program. It was kind of competency-based before people were using those words in the vet ed space. They really did a good job of thinking about the students, developing a really comprehensive clinical skills and professional skills program. They did a fabulous job. And so I learned about some of these elements of being an educator there. And there was a lot of support for people who had a passion for education. That was valued as a role in the institution. And I think that really helped me to think that this was a role worth pursuing too. And certainly from a, promotion standpoint and evaluation standpoint, education was really given equal weight to, other elements, research, et cetera, which isn't always true. So I'm really grateful for that. And again, the mentorship of Alistair with regards to the pharmacology discipline was huge, and making sure that I was successful. And he kind of helped me along. And, despite my failures in pharmacology, sometimes, he'd help me keep getting better, and was very forgiving of my errors. And then, of course, Emma Reed was there as chair of the clinical skills program, and later associate dean for academic programs. I can't remember exactly the title, but and she was a huge mentor for me as well in that education space. So I think, between just the way Calgary was structured and then the excellent mentorship that I had as a young faculty member really helped set me up for success when I moved to LSU and was able to transition into these roles.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's interesting. You're trained as an internist, and then you were doing this applied therapeutics, a lot of pharmacology. When you think about like teaching different disciplines, are there ways that you approach things differently? Do you think it like doesn't really matter and the same things apply? Like, when you reflect on that, like what's unique about internal medicine or large animal versus small animal or the pharmacology side? What are some thoughts there?
That's a good question. And I think, I've spent most of my time teaching equine medicine and clinical skills. I focused there a lot, but definitely learned things from pharmacology. And I think what was important to me as I moved through these different disciplines and areas, number one is that educational principles are the same regardless. It looks a little bit different. Like, how do you create hands-on learning with clinical skills is truly hands-on. Whereas when you're teaching clinical reasoning, like it's conceptual. And so it's a little bit different, but to me, those are both still kind of hands-on.
Yeah.
And so you just got to frame it in with the context a little bit differently, but think about, how do you keep learners engaged and active in these different environments? So I think that's I don't know that there is too much that's unique about any one discipline. It's just about making sure that application fits the context to me. And I think the other thing that was so valuable to me learning early on, and this was partly because Calgary, we were such a small faculty, everyone kind of had to do everything. And so my motto as an educator became, I can teach anything. And I'm not going to teach anesthesia as well as Eric can, or certainly to the depth that Eric can. But honestly, for a day one ready graduate student, most of those things I felt like, I can do this. It's out of my comfort zone, but I can do this. And I think that was really helpful to me to think about that, those possibilities as far as what can I teach? Oh, I'm a veterinarian. I think
I love that. That's so refreshing to hear, because I I think we run into that issue. And I think we're going to continue to run into that issue in veterinary education, because filling all of the positions that are open in education is going to be really hard. And I think people are going to have to think about non-traditional ways of who can teach what, right? Like, we all are practicing internal medicine, right? I don't have a degree in internal medicine, but guess what? Like, there are times when, like, wherever you want to draw that line, like I do some of that, right? And and Eric definitely does some emergency work, and Catherine does surgery. Like, we all do all the different things. And like you said, you're not like trying to train like a specialist in a specialty that isn't yours. You're training you have the DVM, you're qualified to train these people. And sometimes you're like, it's out of your comfort zone, you need a refresher. But it's really nice to hear you say that, because I think more veterinarians need to hear that and feel that, like, no, you're qualified to teach these things. And like what you said before, maybe in some ways you're better able to reach the students where they are, rather than somebody who's like, light years ahead of them and has a hard time remembering, how do I go through these steps? Because it's become somewhat automated for me. So I think there's a lot of really good insight into that. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's also really refreshing, and we've had these conversations multiple times. It's been a little bit of a thread that has run through our particular podcast, of this idea that the best teachers are not necessarily the experts in those areas, right? And so I'm obviously not specialty trained when it comes to a clinical specialty, but my colleagues are, and you are, Heidi. And I think it's really refreshing to hear specialists say that, because I think oftentimes that is where the pushback comes, right? I have conversations with people about veterinary education and how important the role of the general practitioner is going to be in the future of those those educator roles. And I get a lot of pushback oftentimes from the specialists. Well, they don't know enough. And I'm like, well, they went through the same curriculum you went through to become a veterinarian, and they actually probably know better what a day one ready, quote unquote, day one ready graduate needs to know. Again, they may not have the depth of knowledge, and they may not have, the full detail, but in some ways that's okay, as long as they're willing to go find the depth of information they need and understand what they need to deliver to the students in a way that allows them to be successful. I mean, I will tell you right now, though, On the flip side of that, being out in industry, mentoring many of the new graduates that I'm mentoring, the surgery experiences they're getting is not in depth enough. They are not getting enough training in surgery. They're only getting spay and neuter experience, and that's not enough to teach them what they need to be taught. So I think there's a real risk of us maybe going too far the other direction. But it's nice to know that we have people on both sides that are like trying to figure out where that nice middle line is for our upcoming students.
Well, I think the answer is in teamwork, like what you were describing, Heidi, with your mentors. You're like, okay, I have my mentor who is a pharmacologist, and we can work together. He's got his depth and breadth of knowledge in this very narrow field. And you're like, okay, well, I don't have all that, but I have this clinical experience expertise. So we can meet in the middle. And that's really where we're stronger, right? Not when you do that and I do that, but when we come together and figure out the best way forward. And that's where, again, yeah, if you only teach students spays and neuters, they'll be pretty good at spays and neuters, but like, have they gotten anything beyond that? And so
I'm not sure they're still very good at spays and neuters, to be honest, because they don't get that much experience.
And that will vary. That's true.
Yeah. And
but
I think, yeah, in an ideal world, that's exactly right, Bobby. But people have to talk to each other, and faculty are notoriously bad about talking with each other. So when I talk to people about, curriculum and reassessing curriculum and realigning curriculum, we talk about vertical and horizontal, sort of all that kind of thing, alignment. And I tell people that vertical alignment's super easy because that's top down. It's the horizontal alignment that usually fails because faculty don't like to talk to each other for whatever reason.
It's hard, right? Like, even if it's not, it's just trying to coordinate all of those things and figuring those things out, and the push and pull, and it's just a lot of material too. Yeah. And so how do you navigate that? And we're not always going to agree on what's the most important thing, but building those relationships, I think, is really, really key. When you're describing that, Heidi, that sounds like it was a really, really cool formative experience for you.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have like a list of questions that we often ask our guests, and we cater it a little bit. And this next one is going to be a doozy for you, I think. But so what are your current education challenges? I can't think of a more loaded question to ask a founding dean than that. But yeah, have at it.
Good. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, before I talk about challenges, I think one of the unique benefits and exciting aspects of building a program is that we do get to build a curriculum from the ground up. And so some of the things that are so challenging about a 27-year-old curriculum like we had at LSU, all this overloaded bits of curriculum in areas that it's always harder to cut than it is to build. And so I think we're in a really good place, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to help build and shape this curriculum. Granted, that'll be my associate dean for professional education. That's their role, but I'm here to help, certainly. And so I think that's the best aspect. I think, one of the unique challenges right now of building a new program and a new curriculum is sometimes, honestly, balancing some of the accreditation standards and expectations there with what truly is a day one ready veterinarian. And so we're trying to certainly make sure that we attend to all our accreditation standards, and also make sure that our students are prepared for day one practice. And often those are in alignment, but sometimes they're not. And sometimes there's challenges there. So we're trying to make sure that we're navigating that appropriately.
Can you give some examples, Heidi? I'm curious, because when I helped with accreditation at Midwestern, I remember reading like, man, you could interpret these instructions in a lot of different ways and still meet them.
Yeah. And I think, one of the challenges that we have now is the change in the standards to experience with a house officer. Instead of it used to be an intern and or a resident, and now it's an intern and a resident. And certainly, I think one of the challenges with the traditional model of education in a teaching hospital is the more hierarchical you get with residents and interns, by nature, the less hands-on that is for the students. And so in part, I worry that we're taking away some of those hands-on experiences by requiring them to work with a resident. And so it's just trying to make sure there's a good balance there. Certainly, do I want our students to know that there's a pathway to specialization? Absolutely. But, hopefully they don't need to spend a month with a resident watching them and filling out medical records to know that that's a pathway. And so just trying to make sure we're balancing that appropriately, I think is important.
I have a question regarding the NAVLE. So as you are, I'm sure, aware, the NAVLE scores have dropped, not precipitously, but considerably over the last few years. And there are multiple actually really well-established programs that have not met the standard, and there are new programs online that are not meeting the minimum standard. And so I'm curious as to how you feel in general about the NAVLE, and sort of like, in a perfect world, what you might do in your curriculum to make sure that, or even like maybe profession-wide for veterinary medical education, to ensure that, our students are getting what they need, to be able to demonstrate that in whatever way you think might be best.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of conversation about this, and this was actually one of the focuses, one of the big challenges for our Leadership Academy group when we went through AAVMC. So we talked about this a lot at that time. And I think, ideally there would be a competency-based exam for our students, and kind of some potentially progress exams as benchmarks along the way, but ultimately an exam that did assess them in all of these domains appropriately. And certainly one of the challenges with a multiple choice exam is that that's not appropriate across all the domains. So we're assessing a limited scope of a student's knowledge and reasoning, across all these other things that they need to be able to do, communicate, do the surgery, do the procedure, which, again, I think we've got some really good tools in place with CBVE and looking at the IDER and programmatically looking across programs at how students are doing on clinical rotations. But I don't, it's sometimes puzzling to me, other than that I recognize feasibility is a big aspect to this, but, why we chose this kind of knowledge and clinical reasoning domain as the domain that we need to assess to make sure student graduates are prepared to practice, when there's a lot more to making sure that they truly are day one ready. And for those areas, we're still relying on institutions to measure that outcome and assess that competence. And it's just this small area that we've decided needs to be standardized. So I think that is a challenge for the NAVLE and for trying to figure out what the purpose is and how we can best achieve that purpose. And certainly I recognize the feasibility issues. I do see that. And so not to say that there's an easy solution to what do we do moving forward. But when you look at a competency-based curriculum and what that's trying to achieve, again, there's a lot of extra things that needs to do that aren't going to be in alignment with the NAVLE, because it's trying to achieve a different outcome than just passing the NAVLE.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really unfortunate that it's the sort of benchmark that people really lean towards, in terms of, it seems to be like the sort of flag bearer of the standards, like, oh, our NAVLE pass rate is 84%, or it's 89%, or it's 92%, or whatever. And they're really proud of that, which in some ways they should be. But I agree with you on that significantly. I'm, as you said, how did we come to the decision to do sort of this knowledge-based exam? I'm not sure that was based on any particular thing other than feasibility.
I was gonna say, I doubt it was a conscious decision where they laid out all the options and said, this is what we're going to choose. It was like,
because I mean, it used to be a clinical competency exam. And so they did actually have incorporated some ways to actually test clinical competency and skills. And they actually did have it at one point, a skills-based portion of that. And then because it was just expensive and it was hard and all those things, but we still do that for our foreign graduates.
I was going to say, we still have that for them,
and it's very expensive, but our foreign graduates go through a much more rigorous, I think, licensing exam than our graduates do, which I think is very interesting. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting.
That's the compromise, right? Like you say, okay, nationwide, this is the slice of of what we can assess, and then we're basically going to say, we're going to leave it up to the individual institutions. You are responsible for taking care of the rest of this, and we're going to have the AVMA is going to come in and accredit you and verify. You're going to have to document for us that you are doing these things. But it is kind of a partnership, right? Like there is a lot of trust put on the individual institutions to say, hey, we're entrusting you. We're going to oversee it somewhat, but mostly, like you said, Erica, as you were mentioning, when you go through the accreditation standards, it's intentionally so, right? They're basically saying you need to do this. We're not telling you how to do it. We don't want to be overly prescriptive, but you need to accomplish these things. But there is a lot of freedom, and again, responsibility on the programs ultimately, to make sure, because if the only thing you can do is pass the NAVLE, this is kind of like what you were implying, Heidi, that's not enough. That's like one small fraction. And so, and I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, like that we entrust the institutions, but it does lead to challenges for sure. And I think you're right, Catherine, like the perception that the NAVLE is the thing is the issue. I think it's recognizing this is part of a much that's one piece of a larger puzzle that that needs to be, you know, satisfactorily completed in order to have a day one ready veterinarian.
I mean, I will say on the flip side of that though, Heidi, I think it's really important to point out, like I'm working with a student right now who has just failed the NAVLE for the third time. She was she was a B student when she went through her program. So she was not a poor student at all. And by all rights, she's working as a veterinary assistant. And by all rights, based on the feedback that she's gotten from her, you know, mentors and things like that in the clinic, she's going to be a great doctor. But because she cannot pass this one last hurdle, she may never be a doctor. I hope that's not the case. She's got 2 more chances. I really hope that's not the case. But I mean, her scores are not great. And so I worry very much that she spent a lot of money and put a lot of faith into this program. And it was a newer program, unfortunately, that she went through where she earned really reasonably good grades, and still may not be able to practice because of one single exam, right? Like it feels really icky for lack of a better phrase, to know that somebody out there has worked so hard, paid so much money, done so much, and by all rights is showing the skills that she needs to be a good doctor and will be a very good doctor, but may never be a doctor because of one multiple choice exam, which leads me to this idea that you were talking about, Heidi, which is we don't test our students the way we expect them to practice, right? So I've had this conversation too. It's like, we tell our students from day one, we expect you to work in the gray. We expect you to get comfortable with the gray and the problem solving and the process, but we test them on the outcome. And so we're telling them one thing and we're testing them in another way. And so, yeah, I'd really like to see some conversations around ICVA and the possible evolution, because frankly, it's an expensive exam now already. So
I will just put a plug in for non-standard testing strategies. There are questions that get into that gray, and just for our listeners at home to realize that, and even multiple choice questions can be constructed, you know, in such a way. I think my experience is that most faculty do not do that. They just test recall, and the NAVLE, you know, is just recall as well, which is frustrating.
Although, I mean, I will say they do a lot of work on the NAVLE question.
Oh, good.
They do a lot of vetting. They go through many processes, and they do a lot of reliability and whatever the other one is that I can never remember. So they do go through that process. But I think there's a limited level of ability to test those gray areas, you know, especially if you're using a single best answer. I mean, you could, yeah, right. Like you could do short answer, like 2 or 3 sentences. You could do fill in the blank. You could do sort of multiple good answers or prioritizing. And I don't think that they do that. And I think there's still a way to do that and feasibly do it.
It is. It's just super hard to get like to get 10 veterinarians in the room to agree on what this rubric should look like. I mean, right, the specialty colleges run into the same thing on a smaller scale. But yeah, like I chaired the exam committee for ACVEC for years and was on the committee for years before that. And like you end up writing questions that are recall fact-based because we can all agree this is the answer, right? Versus if you are like, okay, well, you know, here's and we have like for ACVEC, we have a clinical portion of the exam where there is some wiggle room and, you know, the free response things, but that's a bear to grade. And then there's issues with that where you're like, well, how fair is this grading? It's harder to defend, right? To say, this is why the grading was this is why the score is this, like you know, the test standard setting methods aren't really set up well for those kind of exams. So like there are so many challenges, right? Like if you look at that, they can be done, but most of them are designed, right? Like when you look at the statistics for multi-point questions, statistics start getting messy. If you look at a 6-point question and compare that to a 1-point multiple choice, the statistics get messy and people don't agree on like what's the best way to do that. So there's a lot of prudency in some of these things and pragmatism. But
I think the reason I want to butt in is because I'm curious, maybe from your perspective, Heidi, too, as you're building a brand new program, what kinds of technology could we incorporate to help us with that? Like, could we use AI? Could we use things that might follow a more sort of logarithmic or, sort of systemic way that we've programmed? I mean, how are you planning to sort of navigate the sort of massive increase in technology that's affecting us in education in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, certainly what I have recognized so far, I think, and what I've heard and what I'm familiar with, and I'm behind for sure, full disclosure.
Aren't we all?
Definitely not up to date. But I think the benefit of technology is it does allow us to move away from having students try to learn fact-based things and actually have them, find the error in this clinical reasoning of whatever artificial intelligence tool you're using. And so you're actually trying to find the gaps or find the errors. And I think that's really helpful for the clinical reasoning process. Like, how would you do this differently? Is this the answer that you came to? Like, why or why not? And being able to defend that, I think, is really valuable. But it is a balance, right? Because if you don't have any of the facts, you can't reason. We know that. And so there does still, even with artificial intelligence, it can't become a crutch for our students. So they're not learning any of the facts because then they can't interpret them. So I think it's going to be, I think we're all going to be working through this together as far as what degree can we use this to help us, certainly at maybe even the advanced beginner, and as you're moving towards competent level, you can start to integrate that more. But when you're truly a novice, you're not going to know enough to be able to tell if this is an error. And so trying to figure out when and how much to incorporate it and what that looks like, I think from a student learning perspective is going to be our biggest challenge. How do we support them and make sure that they're ready? I think there does seem to be a lot of assistance and room with regards to grading, especially like rubrics and all those things that have taken so much time to grade when you're looking through it. And again, just looking for errors in the grading rubric rather than having to grade each one individually. I think there does seem to be quite a bit of time saving that's available there. So I look forward to seeing, and same thing, like constructing a syllabus, those things that historically have been so time consuming for faculty will hopefully save time and maybe make us a little bit more efficient with regards to number of faculty we need to hire, and save us a little bit of time there. So I'm super curious to see how it plays out. And we've certainly talked about it and thought about it. And we thought about it with a new curriculum at LSU, and it's just evolving so fast too. It's hard to construct a curriculum with how AI is today, because by the time we implement in, a year and a half, it's going to look different.
Or by the end of the podcast, it's
going to
right.
I love that. I think that's so insightful because, I'm thinking back to this whole, like, I think now they allow SAT takers to use the calculators, on the exam, which I never got to do when I was doing the math portion. But the fact of the matter is that, people were all up in arms, but I can't believe we're letting kids use calculators on these, standardized exams. And I'm like, well, they still have to know the basic principles. I mean, if you don't know that 2 + 2 = 4, and you punch in 2 + 2 in your calculator and you get 5, you're still going to get the answer wrong, Yeah. So I think that's a really good way to put it. And it is going to be a really interesting challenge. It's going to be really fun, I think, for the new programs in some ways, because you have the flexibility to incorporate that in ways that a lot of the older programs are behind on or are unwilling to sort of embrace. But it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. Pretty much everything.
I'm curious, Heidi, you mentioned one of the great things about, getting to be part of a new school is, setting the curriculum and doing new things, so what from your perspective are the new things that you're excited to be doing with your program?
So I think for us, one of the things that we're trying to work towards to make sure, we stand out amongst the new programs and frankly, the traditional programs too, but what are our niche areas and how can we best integrate those? So, I mean, our industries here in Arkansas are poultry. Probably everyone knows that. We're the #1 poultry producer in the nation, but we're also the #1 bait fish producer. And I didn't learn that until I landed here, but
what word did you use?
Bait fish.
Bait fish.
Bait fish.
Yeah. I had to look
like minnows and
yep.
Yeah.
Golden shiners and fathead minnows are our biggest exports.
I knew something Eric didn't know. Ooh, I feel so
trying to find ways to integrate that into a curriculum. Again, recognizing like probably not very many students are going into aquaculture, but certainly we've got the county just north of us, Greene County, Paragould area. People are writing health papers and that for fish. And so making sure our students recognize the application of that to some of these unique species. And similarly, making sure that they're familiar. I mean, backyard poultry, in addition to the mass production that we have here in Arkansas, that's also a big thing. So how do we integrate enough poultry that they're prepared with backyard poultry? And then potentially, for those handful of students that go into commercial poultry, how do we make sure they're prepared? So trying to create unique aspects to a curriculum that will allow us to stand out and serve the state of Arkansas, because that's really important to me, is that we're here to serve Arkansas. We're an underserved state from an animal health perspective, and so just trying to find ways to make that all fit together. And again, day one ready, and look, you can do these unique things here in Arkansas too.
I love that approach, and I'm curious how you feel like that A is going to be received by students, but B, how you feel like that fits in with the whole accreditation issue, because we've had multiple conversations on this podcast about sort of the incompatibility of us continuing to try to teach all of the species and all of the things in this, the same amount of time. And I talk about that in my book as well, like this idea that we're still trying to cram 10 pounds of poop into a 5-pound bag, right? It just doesn't work. And so do you feel like you're going to be on the cusp, on the front edge of saying, hey, listen, this is like our niche, and we really want our students to be really well prepared for this, while we're also trying to prepare them for everything else? But like, are you scared that that's going to not be successful? And like, are you going to use that then as sort of fuel to say, this is why we need to really change the paradigm? Or sort of, what are your thoughts about that?
So I think, ultimately now with program development, our goal is to make sure we hit all the standards. But for us, poultry is our exotic, and we're like, yeah, we'll add some reptiles in wherever we need to supplement that. But largely, like from a necropsy perspective, all those things, poultry works for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so as far as hitting those standards, like using the resources that we have to achieve those, I think makes sense. And from a student perspective, I think one of the things to me that's really valuable to try to instill in our students early is this idea of translation, right? We are veterinarians and it's comparative. And I think one of the, I think that helps our students a bit. And also, making sure, again, we get the right faculty on board that are willing to also translate that and say, this is how it's like in a chicken. Now you want to work on dogs, like this is what it looks like in a dog. And so making sure that that's kind of bilateral communication about how this chicken applies to what the student wants to do, or if they want to do chickens, even better. But making sure that translational or comparative aspect of veterinary medicine is really highlighted is important for us, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that it's sustainable, the current model of veterinary education?
So I think what I hope that the future holds for us, I'm going to redirect your question a little bit there, Catherine, but what I hope the future holds for us is I hope that we start to see opportunities for programs to create some of these niche curriculums that make sense. Ultimately, I think we all need to train a general practice veterinarian, because that's where most of our graduates go to some degree. But then like what other species they practice in, I don't know that it's feasible for us to train them to be well prepared to practice across 25 species. So where do we focus our efforts? I think that's important. And I think similarly, kind of thinking about career pathways, are we all trying to train specialists? And I would, I hope that the future allows for some of our institutions to say, hey, we're here to train a generalist. That's what we do. And this is how we do that. And there are other places that train specialists. And yeah, our students should know those specialist pathways exist. But I don't know that we all need to be responsible for training that specific career pathway. Just like I don't think every institution needs to train poultry veterinarians, right? So we can do that. Happy to do that. But I don't think everyone should have to do that, and we need to allow programs to have those areas.
That's very cool. That's exactly what we've talked about here before. What just occurred to me though is all it would take is for some institution to say, we are going to focus on wildlife. And they would just get all the applicants.
Yeah.
Right? Like that you
So
just
true.
game the system and be like, you get to come here and play with charismatic megafauna. And it's
Yeah.
like, all right, game over. You just get all the student applications.
Yeah, I mean, that's true to some extent, but I think you'd be amazed at how many students say they want to do that. And I mean, I think like 90% of them actually never follow through.
Oh no, they never do, but they
No.
don't know that going in.
Well,
Yeah,
when
Like,
they're when they're
serious,
20 years old.
they're just
this is a
romanticizing this
very
whole
upsetting
idea.
disconnect for me. Yeah, when
Yeah.
interviewing students is like what they want to do, which is play with giraffes, and what they're gonna do, which is
Yeah.
treat poodles in Palm Springs, are two different things.
You know the irony though, like I took a very traditional path and I was never planning on going into wildlife. And then my career has afforded me opportunities to like play with a baby rhino and like help resuscitate a cheetah cub. Like it's so funny. Like that was never my goal, but because of various opportunities that I took, I did get to do that. And like you were saying, Heidi, like that I felt like I had a really good broad training. Not that I'm an equine specialist, but I took those large animal rotations and I like, I invested in that. Like I have principles that I learned from those species that I apply to this day in other species. And I think there is something kind of magical about that in veterinary medicine that I'm not going to claim to be an expert in all species, for sure not. But I think we do have a pretty solid foundation that allows us to problem solve and to say, okay, I'm not quite in my comfort zone. And obviously the exotic, veterinarians are like the pinnacle of this, where every day it's just like, oh, let's see what happens. But it's not completely out of nothing, right? Like they're using so much foundational knowledge and extrapolating from similar species, and I think veterinarians are just really uniquely
and like shelter med and poultry, it's like you're dealing with epidemiologic problems.
Yeah. No, I mean, I 100% think that we need to continue the comparative aspect. I just don't think we need to do the comparative aspect quite so broadly and expect our students to really understand that. Like, do I appreciate having a little bit of knowledge about cattle and horses and things like that? Yeah. Have I retained nearly enough information to be able to do what I'm allowed to do nowadays and go out and suddenly say, I want to be an equine vet tomorrow and not lose my license the next day? No, right? Like,
and that's where we've kind of talked about it, the limited licensure, right?
Yeah.
And so the education can be, one layer, and then the licensing could be a separate layer. Because I actually have worked with veterinarians who like practice equine medicine for years, and then we're like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. And you're like, you might want to go back and review some stuff before you just jump right in, but your license doesn't require that, right? Like I could decide tomorrow that I'm going to be a poultry vet. I didn't go to Arkansas and I didn't get the training, but that's what I'm doing. And that's, I think, really where the issue is. But then we get back to like, okay, so how many NAVLEs are there going to be to bring?
Well, but I mean, if you think about it, I've had this conversation too, because if you think about it, like 60 to 70% of the NAVLE is canine feline focused, right? So even our large animal folks who know they want to be large animal, they still have to study 60 to 70% of something that they're far more likely to see a dog or a cat than a dog or cat that is to see a horse or a pig, granted, but the fact of the matter is they get shortchanged really badly in that sense, right? And so I think there's lots of opportunity for, as Heidi said, to kind of evolve the curriculum and move programs more towards niche, while you're still maintaining some level of that basic comparative medicine to allow people to make those translate that knowledge. But maybe it's dogs and cats and things that look like dogs and cats are focused on in one school, and there are ruminants in another school with some other large animal, cecal fermenters in there or whatever. So you're still getting some of that comparative aspect, but you're not necessarily having to shove 7 of those core species together and have to learn 7 different physiologies and pharmacologies and histologies and pathologies and all of the things that we have to learn.
Still have a basic NAVLE that does cover the comparative species, and then here's this additional piece, right? And that you see that in a lot of specialty colleges. Well, I mean, like the ACVIM is sort of built on that, right?
Right.
You have, hey, here's the foundational knowledge that we think is true across the specialties, and now you're going to go take your cardiology exam, and now you're going to take your neurology exam, and
ZMed is that way, actually. I don't think people are that familiar with it, but you can get ACZM certified, and then you can get a reptile certification, you can get an avian certification, you can get a megafauna, I mean,
these things kind of already exist. It's not like we'd have to invent it from scratch. It'll be interesting, what it would take to move in that direction.
Yeah, what do you think it would take, Heidi, and how long? Do you think that's something we'd see in our lifetime, or is that like pie in the sky and we're all going to be dead for 2 decades before anybody finally does anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I I think it comes down to, where the enthusiasm and the pressure comes from to make those changes happen. And I think, if for example, all the state licensing boards came together and said, we need a species specific licensure and we don't want the Navily anymore, that would be a pretty quick turnaround for that not to happen, right? And so
can you imagine
how do we do
scenario?
that?
Yeah, can you imagine where all the states came together for anything? They all came together and that didn't happen. Yeah, the end.
But yeah, I mean, I think if it comes from the educational institutions, that's going to be a longer pathway. But if we can, if it comes from regulatory boards, then that's a pretty quick mechanism. But it does take a bit to get, sufficient numbers and consensus on board to make those sorts of sweeping changes. I think you'd have to come up with examples of why the current system doesn't work too, right? Like, why do we need to change this? Why isn't this working? And those might be hard to find sometimes.
I have lots of those.
Yeah.
I want to know, right? I want to move on because I want to know more about like, what is it like being a dean starting a program? You're our only guest that we've had on that can talk to this topic.
And can I also add on to that? What is it like being a younger dean? Because I think you're probably in amongst a lot of old school type of deans. So I'm curious about that too.
So I can start off by saying, being a dean of a new program is amazing. It's everything that I ever thought that it could be and better. So I love it. Not to say that it's all rainbows and unicorns, but like it mostly is rainbows and unicorns right now. I'm not gonna lie. And I'll say, I think I'm in a pretty unique position, even amongst new institutions, although I think, Rowan and Clemson certainly have support too, but I'm very grateful to be at a public institution where we've got the support and infrastructure to really move this forward. I'm grateful. I've got huge support by the provost and the chancellor, and it's been just really a great journey. And I will say they had a good team in place. Founding Dean Glenn Hofsis, he was here for a year before I started to get things rolling. Jim Lloyd still consults with us. My senior associate dean was the former executive vice chancellor and chief operating officer of the university. So like I have a really amazing supportive team that helps navigate some of the things that, I've not had a ton of experience with. And so I've been put in a very good position to succeed. And honestly, it's my team that has made this adventure so amazing so far. So I'm very, very grateful for that. As far as being a young dean, I think sometimes it cracks me up because a lot of the members of my founding team, we aren't the same age.
So politically correct.
He's already doing the politically correct thing. You're already so good at it.
So I tease them a lot about some of those things sometimes, and then they come back and tease me about the things that I have yet to learn, young grasshopper sort of thing. So I think it's a good balance and works well. I do think, and maybe this is me buying too much into myself, but I do think there is something to be said for the energy and enthusiasm for getting people on board and momentum. And I think not that, again, not to be ageist and not to say that you can't do that when you're older, but I do think I've come here with the trajectory of my career, and I think that's been really helpful. Because in the education space right now, like it's a great space to be in with competency-based education and all this revolution that's going on in that space anyways. And that's allowed me to launch and really feel comfortable moving a whole program forward. So I think it's, from my perspective, a great time to be a young dean and a super, just an amazing experience.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that just your approach to things in general is very positive, and that energy. I think Arkansas is really, really lucky to have snagged you as their dean. I think that's really, it's lovely to hear that you're loving it. I'm so excited for you.
I also love to hear a little bit of that Southern twang coming out, because I know you said you're from Montana. So there's this like really interesting northern accent that sort of has these interspersed little southern things. And I'm like,
You
oh,
can tell
that's
you
so
bounced around.
interesting. I love it.
Canadian, Arkansas, and Louisiana, and all mixed in one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
What has surprised you? Like what things came up? You're like, I did not know I was going to be dealing with that.
I think I'm really like every week, if not every day, there's something that comes up that I'm like, well, I mean, I guess we'll fix this today. So I think it is a new adventure. That way, I think I'm trying to think, Bobby, of a specific instance of something that surprised me recently. And I don't have one, unfortunately, on the tip of my tongue here.
You're just so used
yeah.
to the surprises, they're not surprising anymore.
Yeah, I do think, and I will say that's again one thing I'm very grateful. I have a team of like solution seekers and solution finders, and so there are always challenges. And what has made this experience again tremendous to date is the fact that we work together to find solutions, and there's nothing insurmountable for any member of my team, and everyone's on board and they see the vision. And even we've got a new hire coming on March 1st I'm super excited about, but like the team knows what we're trying to do right now. And a part of it that's small, right? So you don't get those lapses in communications that just happen when the team grows. But everyone is like pulling in the same direction, and we all know it's a big lift, and everyone's on board. So again, solution finders, it's a great team.
That's very cool. Well, and presumably, I mean, have you built, I know you mentioned some mentors that were there before, but like, how do you just get to choose your team? How is that working? How do you create that team of solution seekers?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, had a great founding team that still is with us largely, although in diminishing capacity as we move forward, kind of phasing folks out. We have relied on both the founding members of the team as well as the university team at large to help guide us in some of our leadership team search committees, and then moving forward with faculty searches as well. And that is one really amazing thing about Arkansas State University. It is a very community-centered institution. It's pretty small. We've got 16,500 students, but about half of those are online. So like on campus. Wow. For a state institution, especially one of the vet school, like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's pretty small.
But the wonderful thing about it is that it feels like we're all neighbors. And so everyone works together. And I think everyone is really excited about the future of the vet school. Our our enrollment for animal science was up 34% this last year with the vet school coming. And so I think everyone sees what this can do for A-State, and everyone is on board and excited. And they're all willing to help in whatever way they can to make sure we get the right people on the team.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so I think that's really exciting. I think my question, and I know we're kind of running short on time here, is that there are several new vet schools in the pipeline, around 10 of them, and many of them are opening a second school in another state rather than in a school that doesn't have a vet school. And Arkansas is now opening 2 new vet schools in the state right around the same time. So what are your sort of like thoughts about that? And do you feel like that's something that can be sustained, or like kind of give us some insights from your side?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of new programs coming online, and I think, there's been a good number of studies, a couple out of AAVMC, that suggest there's a pretty substantial workforce deficit for some time to come. There's a new one out of the AVMA that suggests with all these schools coming online that we'll probably meet thresholds somewhere around 2030 or so. But I think one of the things that I've been challenged to interpret from some of these studies, and one of the reasons we just published a study not long ago, a survey a couple of months ago, looking at some of the workforce characteristics. But I think, with our changing workforce, again, I don't know if this is sustainable, but there are a lot of people that are choosing to work 30-hour weeks or 20-hour weeks, and nobody wants to do on call. Well, that means the job of one veterinarian has now become the job of 2 or 3 veterinarians. So now we have double or triple the need for workforce just based upon that sort of new development with regards to what people are prioritizing in their lives, which is not a 70, 60, 80-hour work week. And so I think there are some of those pieces that it remains to be seen how that will fall out in the end. But for now, I mean, I certainly think for the next decade to 15 years, we're going to be in a good place with regards to, being able to fill the gaps in workforces. And certainly, I've been part of my job is, traipse around the country, letting people know that we're a veterinary school and we're coming and going to exhibit halls and, all the things that deans do, I guess. But there is a tremendous amount of our workforce that seems to be hanging on to their roles as practice owners and working, well into their 70s because they can't find someone that wants to work in their practice and wants to own their practice. And not only should we be looking at the workforce deficit now, but once this huge clump of practitioners reaching towards the end of their career retires, and I'm just not sure that that's all been captured. There's just so much dynamic aspects to the workforce right now. I think it's hard, and I'm not trying to be critical of any of those studies that have come out, but I think there's still a lot of space to fill in the veterinary industry. And the other part about it is, and we've had this conversation with some of our practitioners, but not all of our graduates are going to go into veterinary practice, right? Like there's all diverse array of directions that people can go with the DVM degree. And so if we say 70% of our students are going to go into practice, that still takes a good amount of time before we're going to replace all of our needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other concern on my end is the lack of faculty, right? Like we can't fill the faculty roles now that we have in existing programs. So what pool are we going to dip into? And I think that goes back to our original conversation about the importance of really providing opportunities for general practitioners who are quote unquote just DVMs, which I hate that phrase because nobody is just a DVM. DVM is a degree to be very proud of regardless. That we need to invite them into the academic space, and we need to tell them you have value in academia, you have value in contributing to the next generations of veterinarians. So is that sort of part of your pitch and hiring plan as well, or is that,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a really good point. And I think one of the great things about building a new program and particularly having an institution, we're a distributed model. And so we don't have a teaching hospital that we have to staff. And that gives us a lot of flexibility with regards to what our positions look like. And we're working with our community practices to create potential part-time appointments and people that now, if they're looking to kind of, shift away from practice a little bit more, well, I can hire you part-time 2 days a week to teach for us, and you can be in practice 3 days a week. So trying to create positions like, what does this look for you as a faculty member? How do you want this to look? And I think for a while now, we've had these standard positions, and you either fit in this bucket or you fit in this bucket or you don't belong here. And I think if we want to create sustainable positions for faculty, number one, we've got to increase our pool. Generalists are part of our teachers too, and there's so much value in that. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Bringing in people from other disciplines, communication specialists, those people to supplement our faculty, I think is going to be important. But then ultimately creating positions that people want. We're not going to be able to compete on a pay scale with private practice. So what else can I do to make this an attractive position to you? Like, why would you come here? How can I help you want to come here? And that's my job. I think sometimes academia has been, we are a little bit ivory tower and like, oh, well, we're this amazing place to be. So you should want to come here and work 80 hours a week and try to do 3 things at once, and not trying to create positions that a diverse array of people want. And so being flexible and dynamic and trying to fit the workforce, I think, is the future.
Yeah. Love that.
That's amazing. And I love that too. I want to do a standing clap, but I can't because academia is just so stuck in, you have an FTE, you have a 1.0 FTE, right? Like there is no concept of a part-time faculty member that just doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's
so that sounds
actually
great.
silly. And I think,
it's getting better.
Say again?
I do think it's getting a little bit better, but yeah. And then there's also that bucket of, well, you either be tenure track or you're nothing, right? And that's also getting better, but there's so much value in bringing people who are interested in education into these leadership roles. So that's, for me, I think, really great to see somebody who, I mean, yeah, you check all the boxes in terms of being, specialty and all those types of things, but your passion is really education, and that shines through. And I think that it's so important to have somebody in a leadership role that really values that, because that's gonna trickle down through your entire faculty and staff. So I think that's awesome.
Thank you. That's our goal.
Oh, it's such exciting stuff, Heidi. It's so fun. It's fun to hear your perspective, and it's exciting to hear about all that you're doing. And I know we're all going to be really excited to see how things are going in the coming years, because it's going fast. When does your first class, like when are you matriculating the first class?
We're still working through accreditation. So hopefully, with any luck, we'll have our comprehensive visit sometime this summer. And just depending upon when that is, we intend to open up applications, as soon as we get our letter of reasonable assurance, which hopefully will be sometime fall 2025 or early 2026 for our first cohort, fall 2026.
Cool. Yeah.
That's going to be here before you know it.
It is. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know. I can't believe I've been here 6 months already. I'm like, where has it gone?
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, congratulations, and yeah, good luck with everything. Super excited. It was really, really fun to have you on the podcast, and we'll have to circle back and have you back later and keep us posted on how things are going. But great to chat with you, Heidi, and thanks so much for sharing some of your path with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's lovely to see you all again. So glad to be here. Thanks again.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.